The Chappaquiddick incident involved the death of Mary Jo Kopechne, a young colleague of U.S. Senator Edward M. Ted Kennedy, in a tidal channel on Chappaquiddick Island, Massachusetts on July 18, 1969. According to his own testimony, Kennedy accidentally drove his car off a bridge and into the channel, before swimming free and leaving the scene, and not reporting the accident for 9 hours. Meanwhile, Kopechne had died in the car through drowning or suffocation. The next day, Kopechne's body and the car were finally recovered. Kennedy pleaded guilty to a charge of leaving the scene of an accident after causing injury and later received a 2-month suspended jail sentence. The incident became a national scandal, and may have influenced Kennedy's decision not to campaign for President of the United States in 1972 and 1976. The party, on July 18, 1969, 37-year-old U.S. Senator Edward M. Ted Kennedy hosted a party on Chappaquiddick, a small island connected via ferry to the town of Edgeartown, Massachusetts on the nearby larger island of Martha's Vineyard. The party was a reunion for a group of 6 women, including Kopechne, known as the Boiler Room Girls, who had served in his brother Robert's 1968 presidential campaign. Also present were Joseph Gargan, Ted Kennedy's cousin. Paul F. Markham, a school friend of Gargan's who previously served as the United States Attorney for Massachusetts. Charles Tretter, an attorney. Raymond La Rosa. And John Crimmins, Ted Kennedy's part-time driver. Kennedy was also competing in the Edgeartown Yacht Club Regatta, a sailing competition which was taking place over several days. According to his own testimony at the inquest into Kopechne's death, Kennedy left the party at approximately 11:15 p.m. He said that when he announced that he was about to leave, Kopechne told him that she was desirous of leaving, if I would be kind enough to drop her back at her hotel. Kennedy then requested the keys to his mother's car from his chauffeur, Crimmins. Asked why he did not have his chauffeur drive them both, Kennedy explained that Crimmins along with some other guests were concluding their meal, enjoying the fellowship, and it didn't appear to me necessary to require him to bring me back to Edgeartown. Kopechne told no one that she was leaving with Kennedy, and left her purse and hotel key at the party. After the party, Christopher Huckluck was a deputy sheriff working as a special police officer at the Edgeartown Regatta dance that night. At 12:30 a.m. he left the dance, crossed over to Chappaquiddick in the yacht club's launch boat, got into his parked car and drove towards his home, which was south of the Dyke Bridge. He testified that between 12:30 and 12:45 a.m. he had seen a dark car containing a man driving and a woman in the front seat approaching the intersection with Dyke Road. The car had gone first onto the private cemetery road and stopped there. Thinking that the occupants of the car might be lost, Luke had gotten out of his car and walked toward it. When he was 25 to 30 feet away, the car started backing towards him. When Luke called out to offer his help, the car moved quickly eastward, towards the ocean, along Dyke Road in a cloud of dust. Luke recalled that the car's license plate began with an L, and contained 27S, both details true of Kennedy's 1967 Oldsmobile Delmont 88. According to his inquest testimony, Kennedy made a wrong turn onto Dyke Road, an unlit dirt road that led to Dyke Bridge. Dyke Road was unpaved, but Kennedy, driving at approximately 20 miles an hour, took no particular notice of this fact, and did not realize that he was no longer headed toward the ferry landing. Dyke Bridge was a wooden bridge angled obliquely to the road, with no guardrail. A fraction of a second before he reached the bridge, Kennedy applied his brakes. He then drove over the side of the bridge. The car plunged into tide-swept Poucher Pond and came to rest upside down underwater. Kennedy recalled later that he was able to swim free of the vehicle, but Kopechne was not. Kennedy claimed at the inquest that he called Kopechne's name several times from the shore, then tried to swim down to reach her 7 or 8 times, then rested on the bank for around 15 minutes before returning on foot to Lawrence Cottage, where the party attended by Kopechne and the other Boiler Room Girls had occurred. Kennedy denied seeing any house with a light on during his journey back to Lawrence Cottage. In addition to the working telephone at the Lawrence Cottage, according to one commentator, His route back to the cottage would have taken him past 4 houses from which he could have telephoned and summoned help. However, he did not do so. The first of those houses, referred to as Dyke House, was 150 yards away from the bridge, and was occupied by Sylvia Malm and her family at the time of the incident. Malm stated later that she had left a light on at the residence when she retired for that evening. According to Kennedy's testimony, Gargan and party co-host Paul Markham then returned to the waterway with Kennedy to try to rescue Kopechne. Both of the other men also tried to dive into the water and rescue Kopechne multiple times. When their efforts to rescue Kopechne failed, Kennedy testified, Gargan and Markham drove with Kennedy to the ferry landing, both insisting multiple times that the accident had to be reported to the authorities. According to Markham's testimony, Kennedy was sobbing and on the verge of becoming crazed. Kennedy went on to testify that, I had full intention of reporting it. And I mentioned to Gargan and Markham something like, you take care of the other girls. I will take care of the accident. That is what I said, and I dove into the water. Kennedy had already told Gargan and Markham not to tell the other women anything about the incident, because I felt strongly that if these girls were notified that an accident had taken place and Mary Jo had, in fact, drowned, that it would only be a matter of seconds before all of those girls, who were long and dear friends of Mary Jo's, would go to the scene of the accident and enter the water with, I felt, a good chance that some serious mishap might have occurred to any one of them. Gargan and Markham would testify that they assumed that Kennedy was going to inform the authorities once he got back to Edgeartown, and thus did not do so themselves. According to his own testimony, Kennedy swam across the 500-foot channel, back to Edgeartown and returned to his hotel room, where he removed his clothes and collapsed on his bed. Hearing noises, he later put on dry clothes and asked someone what the time was. It was something like 2:30 a.m., the senator recalled. He testified that, as the night went on, I almost tossed and turned and walked around the room. I had not given up hope all night long that, by some miracle, Mary Jo would have escaped from the car. Back at his hotel, Kennedy complained at 2:55 a.m. to the hotel owner that he had been awoken by a noisy party. By 7:30 a.m. the next morning he was talking casually to the winner of the previous day's sailing race, with no indication that anything was amiss. At 8 a.m., Gargan and Markham joined Kennedy at his hotel where they had a heated conversation. According to Kennedy's testimony, the two men asked why he had not reported the accident. Kennedy responded by telling them about my own thoughts and feelings as I swam across that channel. That somehow when they arrived in the morning that they were going to say that Mary Jo was still alive. The three men subsequently crossed back to Chappaquiddick Island on the ferry, where Kennedy made a series of telephone calls from a pay telephone near the crossing. The telephone calls were to his friends for advice, and again, he did not report the accident to authorities. Recovery of Kopechne's body and Kennedy's statement. Earlier that morning, two amateur fishermen had seen the submerged car in the water and notified the inhabitants of the cottage nearest to the scene, who called the authorities at about 8:20 a.m. Edgeartown Police Chief James Arena arrived at the scene about 10 or 15 minutes later. After attempting unsuccessfully to examine the interior of the submerged vehicle, Arena summoned a professional diver, along with equipment capable of towing or winching the vehicle out of the water. The diver, John Farrar, arrived at 8:45 fully suited in scuba gear, discovered Kopechne's body and extricated it from the vehicle within 10 minutes. Police checked the car's license plate and saw that it was registered to Kennedy. When Kennedy, still at the payphone by the ferry crossing, heard that the body had been discovered, he crossed back to Edgeartown and went to the police station. Gargan simultaneously went to the hotel where the Boiler Room girls were staying to inform them about the incident. At 10 a.m. Kennedy entered the police station in Edgeartown, made a couple of telephone calls, then dictated a statement to his aide Paul Markham, which was then given to the police. The statement was as follows. On July 18, 1969, at approximately 11:15 p.m. in Chappaquiddick, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, I was driving my car on Main Street on my way to get the ferry back to Edgeartown. I was unfamiliar with the road and turned right onto Dyke Road. instead of bearing hard left on Main Street. After proceeding for approximately 1/2 mile on Dyke Road, I descended a hill and came upon a narrow bridge. The car went off the side of the bridge. There was one passenger with me, one Miss Mary Kopechne, a former secretary of my brother Senator Robert Kennedy. The car turned over and sank into the water and landed with the roof resting on the bottom. I attempted to open the door and the window of the car but have no recollection of how I got out of the car. I came to the surface and then repeatedly dove down to the car in an attempt to see if the passenger was still in the car. I was unsuccessful in the attempt. I was exhausted and in a state of shock. I recall walking back to where my friends were eating. There was a car parked in front of the cottage and I climbed into the back seat. I then asked for someone to bring me back to Edgeartown. I remember walking around for a period and then going back to my hotel room. When I fully realized what had happened this morning, I immediately contacted the police. Legal proceedings. On July 25, 7 days after the incident, Kennedy pleaded guilty to a charge of leaving the scene of an accident after causing injury. Kennedy's attorneys suggested that any jail sentence should be suspended, and the prosecutors agreed to this, citing Kennedy's age, character and prior reputation. Judge James Boyle sentenced Kennedy to 2 months incarceration, the statutory minimum for the offense, which he suspended. In announcing the sentence, Boyle referred to Kennedy's unblemished record, and said that he has already been, and will continue to be punished far beyond anything this court can impose. Kennedy's televised statement, at 7:30 p.m. That evening Kennedy made a lengthy prepared statement about the incident which was broadcast live by the television networks. Among other things, he said that, only reasons of health had prevented his wife from accompanying him to the regatta. There was no truth whatever to the widely circulated suspicions of immoral conduct regarding Kennedy's and Kopechne's behavior that evening. He was not driving under the influence of liquor. His conduct during the hours immediately after the accident made no sense to him at all. His doctors had informed him that he had suffered cerebral concussion and shock, but he did not seek to use his medical condition to escape responsibility for his actions. He regarded it as indefensible that fact that he did not report the accident to the police immediately. Instead of notifying the authorities immediately, Kennedy requested the help of 2 friends, Joe Gargon and Paul Markham, and directed them to return immediately to the scene with him in order to undertake a new effort to dive down and locate Miss Kopechne. All kinds of scrambled thoughts went through his mind after the accident, including whether the girl might still be alive somewhere out of that immediate area, whether some awful curse actually did hang over all the Kennedys, whether there was some justifiable reason for him to doubt what had happened and to delay his report, and whether somehow the awful weight of this incredible incident might in some way pass from his shoulders. He was overcome by a jumble of emotions: grief, fear, doubt, exhaustion, panic, confusion and shock. Having instructed Gargan and Markham not to alarm Mary Jo's friends that night, Kennedy returned to the ferry with the 2 men, and then suddenly jumped into the water and impulsively swam across, nearly drowning once again in the effort, returning to his hotel around 2 a.m. and collapsed in his room. Kennedy then asked the people of Massachusetts to decide whether he should resign. If at any time, the citizens of Massachusetts should lack confidence in their senator unregistered trademark's character or his ability, with or without justification, he could not in my opinion adequately perform his duties, and should not continue in office. The opportunity to work with you and serve Massachusetts has made my life worthwhile. So I ask you tonight, the people of Massachusetts, to think this through with me. In facing this decision, I seek your advice and opinion. In making it I seek your prayers. For this is a decision that I will have finally to make on my own. He concluded by quoting a passage from his brother John's book Profiles in Courage. Testimony and cause of death: John Farrar, the diver who recovered Kopechne's body and captain of the Edgeartown Fire Rescue Unit, asserted that Kopechne did not die from the vehicle overturn or from drowning, but rather from suffocation, based upon the posture in which he found the body and its position relative to the area of an ultimate air pocket in the overturned vehicle. Farrer also asserted that Kopechne would likely have survived had a more timely attempt at rescue been conducted. Farrer located Kopechne's body in the well of the back seat of the overturned submerged car. Rigor mortis was apparent and her hands were clasping the back seat and her face was turned upward. Farrer testified at the inquest. It looked as if she were holding herself up to get a last breath of air. It was a consciously assumed position. She didn't drown. She died of suffocation in her own air void. It took her at least 3 or 4 hours to die. I could have had her out of that car 25 minutes after I got the call. But Ted Kennedy didn't call. Farrer testified later at the inquest that Kopechne's body was pressed up in the car in the spot where an air bubble would have formed. He interpreted this to mean that Kopechne had survived in the air bubble after the accident, and concluded that, had I received a call within 5 to 10 minutes of the accident occurring, and was able, as I was the following morning, to be at the victim's side within 25 minutes of receiving the call, in such event there is a strong possibility that she would have been alive on removal from the submerged car. Farrer believed that Kopechne lived for at least 2 hours down there. The deceased wore a blouse, bra, and slacks, but no panties. The medical examiner, Dr. Donald Mills, was satisfied that the cause of death was accidental drowning. He signed a death certificate to that effect and released Kopechne's body to her family without ordering an autopsy, and Kopechne was buried just a day after dying. Later, on September 18, District Attorney Edmund Nees attempted to secure an exhumation of Kopechne's body in order to perform a belated autopsy, citing blood found on Kopechne's long-sleeved blouse and in her mouth and nose, which may or may not be consistent with death by drowning. The reported discovery of the blood was made when her clothes were given to authorities by the funeral director. Judge Bernard Prominski, of the Court of Common Pleas of Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, had a hearing on the request on October 20, 21. The request was opposed by Kopechne's parents. Forensic pathologist Werner Spies testified on behalf of Joseph and Gwen Kopechne that the autopsy was unnecessary and the available evidence was sufficient to conclude that Kopechne died from drowning. Eventually Judge Brominski ruled against the exhumation on December 10, saying that there was no evidence that anything other than drowning had caused the death of Mary Jo Kopechne. Inquest. The inquest into Kopechne's death occurred in Edgeartown in January 1970. At the request of Kennedy's lawyers, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ordered that it be performed secretly. The 763-page transcript of the inquest was released 4 months later. Judge James A. Boyle presided at the inquest. Among Judge Boyle's conclusions in his inquest report were the following: the accident occurred between 11:30 p.m. on July 18 and 1:00 a.m. on July 19. Kopechne and Kennedy did not intend to drive to the ferry slip and his turn onto Dyke Road had been intentional. A speed of 20 miles per hour as Kennedy testified to operating the car as large as his Oldsmobile would be at least negligent and possibly reckless. For some reason not apparent from Kennedy's testimony, he failed to exercise due care as he approached the bridge. There is probable cause to believe that Edward M. Kennedy operated his motor vehicle negligently, and that such operation appears to have contributed to the death of Mary Jo Kopechne. Under Massachusetts law, Boyle, having found probable cause that Kennedy had committed a crime, could have issued a warrant for his arrest, but he did not do so. District Attorney Nees chose not to prosecute Kennedy for manslaughter, despite Judge Boyle's conclusions. The Kopechne family did not bring any legal action against Senator Kennedy, but they did receive a payment of $90,904 from the senator personally and $50,000 from his insurance company. The Kopechnes later explained their decision to not take legal action by saying that we figured that people would think we were looking for blood money. Grand jury. On April 6, 1970, Dukes County grand jury assembled in special session to consider Kopechne's death. Judge Wilfred Parkett instructed the members of the grand jury that they could consider only those matters brought to their attention by the Superior Court, the district attorney or their own personal knowledge. Citing the orders of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, Parkett told the grand jury that it could not see the evidence or Judge Boyle's report from the inquest. District Attorney Nees, who had attended the inquest and seen Judge Boyle's report, told the grand jury that there was not enough evidence to indict Senator Kennedy on potential charges of manslaughter, perjury or driving to endanger. The grand jury called 4 witnesses who had not testified at the inquest. They testified for a total of 20 minutes, but no indictments were issued. Fatal accident hearing. On July 23, 1969, the registrar of the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles informed Senator Kennedy that his license would be suspended until a statutory hearing could be held concerning the accident. This suspension was required by Massachusetts law for any fatal motor accident where there were no witnesses. The in-camera hearing was held May 18, 1970. It found that operation was too fast for existing conditions. On May 27 the registrar informed Senator Kennedy in a letter that "I'm unable to find that the fatal accident in which a motor vehicle operated by you was involved, was without serious fault on your part, and that as a result, his driver's license was suspended for a further 6 months." Miscarriage. Senator Kennedy's wife Joan Bennett Kennedy was pregnant at the time of the incident. Though confined to bed because of 2 previous miscarriages, she attended the funeral of Kopechne and stood beside her husband in court 3 days later. She suffered a 3rd miscarriage soon thereafter, which she blamed on the Chappaquiddick incident. Other interpretations of the evidence. A BBC Inside Story episode, Chappaquiddick, broadcast on the 25th anniversary of the death of Mary Jo Kopechne, advanced a theory that Kennedy and Kopechne had gone out from the party in Kennedy's car, but that when Kennedy saw an off-duty policeman in his patrol car, he got out of the car, fearing the political consequences of being discovered by the police late at night with an attractive woman. According to the theory, Kennedy then returned to the party while Kopechne, unfamiliar both with the large car and the local area, drove the wrong way and crashed off the bridge. The episode argued this explanation would account for Kennedy's lack of concern the next morning and for forensic evidence of the injuries to Kopechne being inconsistent with her sitting in the passenger seat. Best-selling investigative writer Jack Olson had earlier advanced a similar theory in his book The Bridge at Chappaquiddick, published early in 1970. Olson's book was the first full-length examination of the case. Olson wrote that Kopechne's shorter height could have accounted for her possibly not even seeing the bridge as she drove Kennedy's car over unfamiliar roads, at night, with no external lighting, after having had several alcoholic drinks at the party both had attended. Olson wrote that Kopechne normally drove a smaller Volkswagen model car, which was much lighter and easier to handle than Kennedy's larger Oldsmobile. Legacy. The case resulted in much satire of Kennedy, including a mock advertisement in National Lampoon magazine showing a floating Volkswagen Beetle with the remark that Kennedy would have been elected president had he been driving a Beetle that night. This satire resulted in legal action by Volkswagen, claiming unauthorized use of its trademark. National Lampoon also printed a fake quote from Kennedy, as a response to a question in whether he planned to campaign for president in the next election: "I'll drive off that bridge when I come to it." After Kennedy's televised speech on July 25, 1969, regarding the incident, telephone calls and telegrams to newspapers and to the Kennedy family were heavily in favor of his remaining in office, and he won re-election the next year with 62% of the vote. Nonetheless, the incident severely damaged his national reputation. Before Chappaquiddick, public polls showed that a large majority expected Kennedy to run for the presidency in 1972. After the incident, he pledged not to run in 1972 and declined to serve as George McGovern's running mate that year. In 1974, he pledged not to run in 1976, in part because of the renewed media interest in Chappaquiddick. Kennedy finally announced his candidacy for the American presidency in late 1979, challenging incumbent President Jimmy Carter for the Democratic nomination for the 1980 election. On November 4, 1979, CBS broadcast a one-hour television special presented by Roger Mudd titled Teddy. The program consisted of an interview with Kennedy, interspersed with visual materials. Much of the show was devoted to the Chappaquiddick incident. During the interview, Mudd questioned Kennedy repeatedly about the incident and at one point accused him directly of lying. During the interview, Kennedy also gave what one author described as an incoherent and repetitive answer to the question, "Why do you want to be president?" and called the American-supported Shah of Iran one of the most violent regimes in the history of mankind. The program inflicted serious political damage on Kennedy. Carter alluded to the Chappaquiddick incident twice in 5 days, once declaring that he had not panicked in the crisis. Kennedy lost the Democratic nomination to Carter, but remained a senator until his death in 2009. After Kennedy's death, Ed Klein, an editor for New York Times Magazine and an author of several books about the Kennedy family, stated that Kennedy asked people he met, "Have you heard any new jokes about Chappaquiddick?" Klein also said, "Eat a Euro unregistered trademark S. Not that he didn't a Euro unregistered trademark T feel remorse about the death of Mary Jo Kopechne, but that he still always saw the other side of everything and the ridiculous side of things too." References. Bibliography. Further reading. External links: FBI Chappaquiddick Investigation Files, Ted Kennedy's speech following Chappaquiddick incident, Mary Jo photos and rescue diver audio, John Farrar interview on The Howie Carr Show.